So again, my name is Jack Wang, CEO of Longhorn Financial. It's a crazy time. So tonight we're going to be talking about the financial aid letter, sort of in two contexts, right? And payment strategies and appeal strategy and things like that. Sort of in one context of sort of normal time, another context of sort of the coronavirus COVID-19 times. And so I'll talk a little bit about sort of what it's supposed to be and how some of the changes have taken place during this crisis. Right. And again, please feel free to ask questions anytime. I look forward to your questions. There is no dumb question. So let's just start with timeline. All right. The normal timeline and sort of what happens when. And so first things first, for senior parents, your deadline for sending in deposits to decide which school your son or daughter is going to go to. For most colleges, it is still May 1st. However, there are some schools out there. There's actually a growing number of schools that have postponed those dates to June 1st because obviously people's financial situations have changed. Whether reduction hours, job loss, or on the flip side, if you're families that have healthcare workers, maybe they're working like crazy hours and they just don't have time to figure some of this stuff out, which is understandable. But generally, May 1st to June 1st, if if the school has changed, you should generally get a notification from that school indicating that's June 1st now. And anywhere between June to August, I know that's a big gap, but anywhere between June and August is when bills arrive. All right, typically. All right, so colleges bill by the semester, so you're going to get your first bill for the fall semester sometime in that time frame. July to September, and when I mean September, I mean like right at the beginning of September before school starts, bills would be due or payment arrangements have to be made. I'll say it that way. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But basically, the college needs to know that either the money's been paid or the money's on its way, as in like a payment plan or something like that. And then really sort of mid to late August into early September is move-in date, right? So that's going to be here before you know it. Again, crisis, pandemic sort of notwithstanding, we're operating under the assumption that our high school seniors will be going off to college and moving into their new dorms sometime in the August to September timeframe. Obviously, if the situation changes, you'll get notified by the college, but this is the rough timeline for right now. So really, three topics we're going to talk about today. Number one, understanding award letters. There's lots of different aid terms and items, and they're not always clear. So we're going to go over sort of what those are and how they work and what they mean. We'll actually talk about the different payment options, right? Different ways to actually pay the bill. Different loans, how do those work, things like that. And then we're going to wrap up with different strategies and appeals, and obviously things to think about. Now, at the end of tonight, there's going to be a lot of information, but it's not going to be complete in that you will still have some things to decide, right? And we're going to talk about some of the questions you should be asking yourself later, but the situation and the answer for every family is very different. So you could have two families with identical schools, identical award letters, identical finances, but go down very different paths on how to actually pay the bill. So a large part of this really is involves having that conversation with your student, having that conversation with your spouse, if applicable, to really get a sense of what works for your family, sort of from an emotional and philosophical standpoint, not just from a pure financial standpoint. So let's start with understanding award letters. Okay. And aid comes in two broad categories. First is merit. Merit, of course, is based on your students' grades, test scores, athletic ability, artistic ability, whatever. Okay, and generally on the award letters, you see these in the form of scholarships or academic grants or fellowships. Generally, those terms. You don't see too many terms beyond that, but generally those terms. Some examples of merit scholarships could be things like the National Merit Scholar Program, or here in Massachusetts, the John and Abigail Adams Scholarship that you might get at a state school. Okay? And again, while schools look at all these factors like grades, test scores, extracurriculars, things like that, the amount of merit scholarship that you get, or the academic grant or the fellowship that you get, it's almost impossible to tell ultimately what factor led to your student getting that or not getting that, right? I see plenty of award letters from clients where there's a big fat zero for merit scholarships. It's just basically impossible to tell why that is versus another school gives 20,000. And then on the need-based side, so the need-based side is all based on what you put on the financial aid form, the FAFSA, the profile form, what have you, right? So there's things like the Pell Grant, which comes from the federal government, the SEOG or Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, subsidized direct loans. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the loan section. Work study, and we'll talk about that later. Institutional grants. Been seeing that quite a bit. You see that from some of your upper tier schools where the school is offering its own money as a need-based grant to the student, right? Based on whatever formula that they want to use. And then institutional loans, and this is again where the school uses its own money, but instead of giving a grant, actually offers up a loan to the student out of its own pockets. So some examples of schools that do this: Northwestern University in Illinois, Tufts here in Massachusetts, WPI here in Massachusetts. I know Loyola Marymount does this as well. So a number of those schools do this, though not every school. Now you'll also notice that there's an asterisk next to 3 of those items. Those 3 items also are referred to as what's called self-help aid. So obviously loans you're borrowing, you have to pay back. And work study is a job on campus that you actually have to do, right? Versus all the other things, they give you the money as a scholarship or grant, you don't have to pay those back. So we like grants and scholarships the best, but subsidized loans, not a terrible thing. So here's an example. So this is a real award letter. You can actually see here easily, the 3rd line down is actually from UNH. It's for a Massachusetts student. And this is an example of where this particular family qualified for most of these items, right? So if you look at this, the Pell Grant, $6,195 was actually the maximum amount that particular year. CR Grant, $2,250, the maximum there is $4,000. So again, $2,250 is not bad, right? And plus you don't have to pay that back. You see the work study on there, the subsidized loan and the unsubsidized loan. But this particular student also qualified for some merit type scholarships. So this student's grades and SAT scores, I think SAT, not ACT in this particular case. But anyway, the scores are high enough to where this student qualified for a non-resident tuition grant at UNH, even though this student was a Massachusetts resident. So that's a good thing. And then the CEPS Academic Engagement Award is a program that UNH offers, again, based on merit. So you don't have to pay those back. So this was actually a really attractive offer for this particular student. And I know hearing from the family that student's doing really, really well at UNH. But this is sort of everything on there. Now, granted, not every student can get all these because not everyone qualifies for those need-based items. So your aid letter might be a lot shorter in terms of items. Okay? Here's another example, and this is one thing you want to watch out for. So I call this example with all the tricks. Okay, so this is actually from a family from this year, and this particular family received this award letter. Now, this particular school starts off right off the bat listing out the estimated tuition fees, and you can see that on there. And this is one thing that schools will sometimes do, is they'll leave out certain items so that you think the cost is actually a lot lower. So you can see here, estimated tuition and fees is $34,148, right? But look at this sort of in the fine print, if you will, right? Students living on campus, so essentially room and board, is going to charge an almost $14,000 for room and board, right? So your total cost of college is not $34,000, it's really $48,000, and then you add in books and everything else, it's really about $50,000, okay? But of course, where does your eye go to? It goes to, oh, this place only costs $34,000, that's great. No, it doesn't. This school also listed out the awards, and so you can see scholarships, a couple of scholarships there. This school is actually Malloy. You can see that there. That Malloy grant is Malloy's own money. That's institutional grant that we talked about earlier, where Malloy is basically offering up their own money for this particular student on a need-based basis. And then, of course, the student also got some work study. Not bad, right? Have a little campus job, make some money. Great. But there's still another trick on this letter. Look at here. So this student's being offered the direct subsidized loan. Again, we'll talk about what that means a little bit later on. And the unsubsidized loan. But look at this item. And you actually see this on a number of letters, okay? So what they do is they take the cost, they subtract out the aid, and then that'll leave whatever balance. And a lot of schools will then say, but hey, parents, you can take out a direct parent plus loan, in this case for about $21,000, like $21,500, and that just covers the rest of the balance. And so a lot of these schools at the bottom will say, hey, your total out-of-pocket cost then would be zero, right? And you're thinking, that's awesome, right? My kid got, like, between all the aid items, essentially got a full ride. No, that's not what it says here. To get to that zero bottom line, this school says, hey, mom, hey, dad, you can take out a $21,500 loan each year in the form of a plus loan, right? Which isn't really an aid item. So it is, the plus loan is, again, we'll talk about how this works in a little bit, but whether you make $50,000 a year or $50 million a year, as long as you filled out the financial aid form, you qualify for the plus loan, right? So the fact that this is on there and people think, wow, that's amazing, I can take out this loan. Yeah, okay, it's not a bad program, but there's really nothing amazing about it. You filled out the form, you qualified, end of story. Right? It has no bearing on how much income you actually have or not. So this is another one of those sort of tricks to make the award letter look better than it really does. And then if you actually look at the total here, they add it up, but I don't show this in this presentation, but sometimes what schools will do is they'll add up these things like the loans and the plus loans. And they'll say, see, we gave you like a $50,000 award package, right? Isn't that great? When in reality, in this case, $21,500 is a plus loan that any dog could have, qualified for on their own, that had, again, no bearing on anything else. So, but schools will say, oh, but we made part of the award package. Well, it's not really part of the award package because, again, you could have just gotten it anyway. Okay. So before we move on to different payment options, let me just do a quick check just to see if there are any questions coming in. All right, so for right now, again, no questions here, but you know what, folks, just make sure that you, if you do have questions, I know I tend to go a little bit fast, so if you do have questions about any of this stuff, please make sure you chat in and please don't be afraid to ask, okay? We're here all learning together, right? So here we have payment options. So each college, no matter where your son or daughter is gonna go, there are a number of options, including things like payment plans. Using savings for 529 plans, of course, that you may have. There's loans, which we've touched upon a little bit, but we'll get into more details. Okay, and then also other types of borrowing, and so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Okay, well, we'll start with the payment plans, and so every school will offer a layaway plan, in essence, a installment plan or whatever it is that they call it. And basically is whatever the balance is after aid each semester, you can sign up for a payment plan, right? But here's the thing is that you don't necessarily have to pay the entire balance with the payment plan. So let's say your balance is, after all the aid is $20,000, you can say, well, you know what, I'm gonna pay $500 a month on a payment plan, and whatever that adds up to be, right, $500 a month times however many months, right, I'm going to cover a part of the balance with the payment plan, and then the other part of the balance I'll use a loan or whatever, and that's fine. Or you can do the whole balance on a payment plan. That's up to you, and you manage it yourself. So these are some screenshots of some schools with information on payment plans. And it is the cheapest option out there because there's no interest, right? And so earlier when I talked about that bills are due by say, July, August, September timeframe, and I said that either you paid the money or you made arrangements for the money. This is kind of what I'm talking about, is that as long as you made an arrangement for the payment plan to cover the balance, then even though you by September you didn't have the entire balance paid off, but it was covered by a payment plan, that's totally fine. So some schools will only give you certain choices in terms of how many payments you can get, right? So this is not, and remember, this goes by the academic year. So you can't say, well, the balance is 20,000 for freshman year. I'll take the 200 payment plan, right? 200-month payment plan, right? Can't do that. It goes by the academic year. So this is a screenshot of examples where this school offers a 3, 4, 5, 6-month payment plan. You set it up by semester or the year. This particular school doesn't give you a choice, right? Each semester you get to do in 4 payments, end of story, right? That's it. And usually, in every case I've seen anyway, and this is pretty common, is that when you set up a payment plan, there's usually a one-time setup fee or an enrollment fee. So you can see on this last screenshot, there's a $65 enrollment fee for this one. And they stipulate in this particular case that it's 5 payments per semester or 10 payments for an academic year. So again, you can, each school is a little bit different. You can sort of pick and choose which one you want to use if you want to go this way. It does tend to be the cheapest way to go because there's no interest charge. Okay. So again, let me pause there for a moment and let me just see if there's any questions coming in. Okay. All right. So let's move on. So that's payment plans. So the next way to pay is obviously using savings, or perhaps you have some 529 plans or other related college savings. Coverdell or education savings accounts, not as popular, but those are still around. If you're taking savings to pay for the college bill and you're just taking out of like a checking account or savings account, not a big deal, right? So you have $10,000 in your savings account, you're gonna just write the check, $10,000 to the school, out of that checking account, no big deal. Where it starts to make a little bit of difference is if you're taking money out of a 529 account. And the reason that is because we as parents tend to think of these things in a school year basis, right? School year starts in September, goes to say May, June, May to June timeframe. That's sort of the way we tend to think about schools, but not so in the case of financial aid, and certainly not so in the case of the IRS. They think of it 529 plan withdrawals in the case of calendar years. And that makes a difference because if you don't time your withdrawals out of the 529 plan correctly, the money that came out of the 529 plan can actually be taxable. And so a perfect example of this is that, let's say after aid, your son or daughter's freshman year is going to be $20,000. And remember, schools bill by the semester, so $10,000 for fall, $10,000 for spring. And you have $20,000 in your 529 plan. So you get that fall semester bill in June for only $10,000. But you say, you know what, I'm just going to take the whole 20 out because I know the whole academic year is going to cost $20,000. So take the whole 20 out in June. And I'll send in 10 for the fall, I'll send in 10 for the spring. Well, the way that the IRS looks at it is that for this calendar year, in this example, 2020, you only had $10,000 worth of qualified expenses. So $10,000 of your 529 plan withdrawal is tax-free, true. But the other $10,000 you took out, right, for spring, but you took it out during the summer, well, that's calendar year 2021, right? But you took the money out in 2020. So the timing of those qualified expenses versus the money doesn't match up. So that other part of that extra $10,000 withdrawal that you took out, for spring, because you only want to do it one time, well, that part's now taxable, right? So the IRS does have windows like plus or minus 3 months a year end. So obviously, so you can withdraw the spring semester money, let's say in December, right? Because it's, because obviously spring semester is going to be due in September, even though the calendar year doesn't match. The IRS does have some exceptions there. But you actually have to watch out for that. So you actually have to be careful of the timing. Otherwise, you could trigger some taxes. And in that particular example that I gave, not only will you pay taxes on the extra $10,000, but because there's no qualified expenses, you would also be subject to the extra 10% penalty, withdrawal penalty, because it was for something other than college, because the years didn't match up. So a lot of pitfalls there. You just want to watch out and just be careful on that. Okay. All right. Let's go on here. What can you use for 529 plan money coming out? Again, if you're paying out of your savings account or checking account, you can use it for whatever you want. But money coming out of a 529, you can use it for tuition fees, room and board. And thanks to the Secure Act, which was passed at the end of the year, right, which seems like an eternity ago, you are now allowed to use 529 plan money to make payments on student loans for your student, whether it's on their loans or whether it's on the loans that you've taken out for your son or daughter. But the limit is $10,000 per student lifetime. So it's not $10,000 a year, okay? It's $10,000 per person lifetime. So it's a nice benefit. It's not a great benefit. What doesn't qualify? Things like student health insurance. Right, so chances are you probably cover your son or daughter on your own health insurance plan through work or whatever. So this isn't usually a big deal for people. What is a much bigger deal is if your son or daughter goes far away to school, and to get him or her to and from school and you to go out to visit, you're flying cross country. Excuse me, you're flying cross country, and to send them back and forth, well, that travel expense is a non-qualified expense. You cannot use 529 plan money for that reason. Okay. And plus, right now, nobody's flying anywhere anyway. So, okay. On to loans. Now, loans come in a couple of flavors, and the direct loans, and you saw these on the award letters earlier. This is to your student. Okay, so you are not the borrower. You do not have to co-sign. It is not on your credit. This is from the federal government direct to your student, to your son or daughter. So after graduation, they're legally on the hook for it. If they don't pay, they wreck their credit, has nothing to do with you. It is a fixed interest rate. Now, each year when you take out the loan, right, freshman year, then sophomore year, then junior year, then senior year, that rate for each particular year's loan might be at a different rate, but once you take out that loan for each year, that rate is now fixed. And currently today it is 4.53, but sophomore year it could be 5, and for the sophomore year loans, and junior it could be 3 for the junior year loans, whatever. There are limits for how much your student can borrow each year. So freshman year, 5,500, sophomore is 6,500, junior, 7,500, senior, 7,500. You add all 4 of those numbers up, it's $27,000. So the stories of my kid graduated with $200,000 worth of debt does not come from this program. Okay. No payments are required during school. So while they're in school, this is great. And in fact, payments don't start for them until 6 months after they leave school. And notice I said that 6 months after they leave school, not graduate. So if your son or daughter decides to take a year off and backpack through Europe, right? It's 6 months after they finish their final semester there, their payments will kick in, even if they intend to go back to school while they're backpacking through Europe. Now, in the age of coronavirus right now, the federal government has deemed that there's 0 interest on these federal loans right now, and there's no payments until the end of September. But in your particular case, where your son or daughter is a high school student about to go to college, it actually doesn't matter, right? Those provisions don't matter to you right now because your son or daughter right now don't have those loans. And even for college students who are about to graduate, as my son is, he's about to graduate from UMass Amherst, those provisions don't even really apply other than the 0 interest right now, because he's going to graduate in May. His first payment technically won't even start till November. and the moratorium on the payments ends in the end of September. Okay, the 0% interest, good, we'll take that for right now, but his payments going to start after this whole thing's going to be over anyway. Okay, and the nice thing about federal loans is there are multiple repayment plans. So when they graduate from school, there's, as of right now, there's like 10 different repayment plans that your son or daughter could pick from, and they can switch at any time for any reason for no cost. It's the only type of loans that anybody can get anywhere where you can actually do that. So it's actually a pretty good deal. Most families encourage their son or daughter to take direct loans because that's the stake in the game from the kid, from the son or daughter, if you will. But that's up to you. Now, we saw earlier also in that Malloy letter, there are these plus loans. They work very, very similarly, except you, as the parent, are the borrower. So again, this is not on your son or daughter, right? So after your son or daughter graduates, if you don't pay these, your credit gets wrecked, not his or hers. Okay, so this is on you, mom and dad. It is a fixed rate. Works the same way as the direct loans. The rate currently is 7.08 with a 4.248% loan fee. And before everybody freaks out like, oh my goodness, that's high. Actually, as student loans go, that's actually kind of low. Oh, by the way, I should go back for a moment. On the direct loan to the student, there were two flavors, subsidized and unsubsidized. Subsidized simply means that while they're in school, no interest accrues. So the interest rate during school might as well be zero anyway. Unsubsidized means that interest does accrue while they're in school, okay? Except when the federal government says, in the case of pandemic, zero interest for everybody, fine. And I bring this up because for Parent Plus loans, it is only unsubsidized. So you take out these loans, interest starts accruing day one for you. You can borrow all the way up to the cost of attendance, which is the full sticker price of the school, okay, with basically no credit check. So if your son or daughter wants to go to college, that's $75,000 a year, right, and they got no aid whatsoever, and you don't want your son or daughter to take the direct loan, you, as the parent, can borrow $75,000 a year to send your kid to that school. Now, whether you should or not is a different story, but you actually can. A little crazy, but you can. You have the right to defer payments while in school. So again, no payments during school. You can set it so payments start 6 months after your son or daughter leaves school. Again, same deal as before, just like them. And you also have multiple repayment plans. Again, there's about 10 different repayment plans, and you can switch at any time to any plan for any reason, no cost. Again, it gives you a lot of flexibility. Okay. All right, let me just pause here. Let me see if there's any questions. All right, good. I hope what this means is that I'm just giving you tremendous information and not because you guys are just lost. I do hear a voice here.
Yes. Hello, Mr. Wang. This is Lauren.
Yes, hi, Lauren.
Hi.
Yes.
I know you explained this, but I had a little interruption and I kind of missed it. So could you repeat it for me again, what the difference is, or what the lingo of the word subsidized and unsubsidized meant, the difference is?
Sure, Lauren, happy to. So the subsidized and the unsubsidized only apply to the direct loans that are to your son or daughter, okay? So not you. Subsidized simply means that while they are in school, right, no payments required, but while they're in school, there's zero interest. Okay, that's it. So how much they borrow is how much they owe. While they're in school, zero interest. Now, once they leave school, interest does start on that part, but while they're in school, no interest. Unsubsidized, again, no payments during school, but unsubsidized simply means that interest does start accruing day one.
Okay.
And that's it.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes,
Great
thank
question.
you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. All right, great question. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's talk a little about private loans. And so private loans are from banks or credit unions. And so pretty soon you're going to start seeing commercials for these players. Not every single not every single bank offers a private loan. Among the bigger players in the market in Massachusetts, Citizens Bank, DCU is a huge player, MIFA, Mass Educational Finance Authority. They're the ones, actually, MIFA, incidentally, they're the ones who actually do the financial aid nights at your high school in the fall. I know close to me, things like Jeanne d'Arc Credit Union, Workers Credit Union. Also, if you're a AAA member, AAA does student loans. I actually know the gentleman. I'm actually good friends with the gentleman who actually handles that for AAA. You have to be a AAA member, but they actually handle that. And other credit unions and sort of banks. But for example, like Bank of America does not do student loans. Santander does not do student loans. In this area, Eastern Bank does not do student loans. So not every bank does student loans. So if you're interested in borrowing from a private lender, you got to check. The interesting thing about the student loan is now you have your choice of borrower, right? So you can borrow yourself as the parent, or you can co-sign for your son or daughter, right? Now, your son or daughter is an 18-year-old college freshman. They're not going to be able to borrow themselves, right? That's just impossible. Okay, but you can co-sign for them, and you might choose to do that. You can choose between a fixed or variable rate. And so you might start seeing commercials like, a client last year asked me, hey, you know, Jack, I saw a commercial that XYZ Bank was offering as student loans as 3%. Well, yeah, if you got the variable rate, you know, so, but you have that choice. However, because it's a private student loan, because you're going to a bank, it is full underwriting. No different than if you're applying for a car loan or a mortgage, right? They're going to want to see your credit score and proof of income and all the other stuff that goes into it. You have payments options during school. So some private loans are no payments at all, like federal loans. Other private loans are you just pay interest day one. That's all that's required. And then still others are full payments day one, right? Your kid goes off today, full payment starts tomorrow type of thing, right? But you have the choice there. The thing with private loans is that they are generally shorter terms. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but of course, now you have to figure out if you can afford that monthly payment if you have to borrow. Okay. And before I go on to strategy appeals, there are some other ways to borrow. So for example, people ask me, can I borrow against my home equity line to pay for college? Absolutely, right? That's your choice. Can I refinance my mortgage and take cash out? Sure, absolutely. Can I borrow from my 401k to do this? Sure, right? If you want, generally not recommended because it hurts your retirement readiness, but you can do it. The thing about the 401k is that by IRS regulations, you're actually limited to either $50,000 or 50% of your balance, whichever is greater. Okay. So, you know, so if you have $1 million 401k balance, the most you can borrow is $50,000. And that's not $50,000 per year, that's $50,000 total, right? They have in loans outstanding. So, or if you only have $10,000 in your 401k, then the most you can borrow is $5,000 or 50%, right? So there are different ways, and you can combine, you know, whichever way you feel is right for you. Now, so this is probably sort of the meat, the meat, right? The good stuff, okay? And this is what everybody wants to know. So when it comes to strategies for paying the bill, as a general rule of thumb, and this is my personal opinion, okay, yours could be totally different. But parents usually end up using their savings or 529 plans first. And I often get the question like, but Jack, you know, I have money, so should I like use all the 529 plan money up front, or should I, you know, spread it out over the 4 years, right? And you can do any one you want, you know, whichever you feel comfortable with. My personal opinion is that if you don't have enough saved so that you ultimately have to borrow at some point, my personal opinion is that you want to use up the 529 plan money up front, because then if you need to borrow, you borrow later and interest accrues less, right? Because there's less time. Like if you don't need to borrow till senior year, then at most you only have 1 year's accrual of interest. Not that bad. As opposed to only paying a little bit each year and then having to borrow a little bit each year. Well, if you do that, you end up having to borrow a little bit, let's say freshman year. Well, that interest accrual is going to start freshman year, right? So, but again, that's my opinion. Every family is a little bit different. Most families generally agree on this. They want their students to take out that direct loan, excuse me, to where it's the child's stake in the game, if you will. Outside scholarships for high school students, you should be using the time. I know everybody's doing online schooling right now, but you should be using the time to look for outside scholarships. Most schools use the guidance software Naviance. There's local scholarships listed there, like a local town XYZ organization might have a scholarship, but there's also national search engines where you should be looking. And by the way, parents, even when your son or daughter goes off to college, some of these scholarships are still available to college students. So just because they're freshmen in college doesn't mean they have to stop looking for this stuff, right? So there's money out there to be had. But after these items, right, there's still a balance left. It really then depends on what you want to do. So, and why I said it's really, up to your philosophies and values, things like that. I have families who say, Jack, I'm not borrowing from my kid to go to college. I don't care what the deal is. I'm just not doing it because I'm not going to debt for it. Okay, fine, right? That's not wrong. Just that's what that family wants to do. Other families say, Jack, I don't mind borrowing because we're going to have to, but I'm not borrowing it on my house because if I lose my job or something happens, I'm not going to lose my house, right? Because I can't make the payment. Okay, again, that's fine, right? Perfectly reasonable answer. And another family say, Jack, I'm not paying 7.08 on a plus loan when I can borrow at 3.5% on my home equity line. Okay, that's not a bad answer either, right? But everybody's different, so you have to sort of figure out where you are, right? If you have to borrow, and to a certain extent, you also figure out sort of how much you're willing to pay, right, in context of your overall finances. And we're going to get to that in just a moment. And this was an article that was, I think, in USA Today a couple years ago, and they did a study of how families pay for college, and it's really funny. So there's scholarships, there's loans, there's parent income and savings, right across the top, student income and savings. The one thing that I can't figure out, and I never had this for my son, and I'm not going to have this for my stepkids, is the relatives and friends, right? Like that's an awesome deal that I'm pretty sure I don't have. So if anybody wants to chip in for my kids' college, I'm more than happy to take your number, right, for that. So, but my point here is that families use different options to piece this together. It's not all scholarship, it's not all payment plans, not all loans, right? You can sort of mix and match whatever you feel like is right for your family. Now, appeals, right? Everybody always asks, can I ask for more money? Because one article on the internet said you can ask for more money. Another article on the internet, though, said you can't ask for more money. Okay, so Jack, what's the truth? The truth is you can ask for more money, but your student has to take the initiative to do it, right? So even though it might be really you, but your student should be the one leading the charge on this. Financial aid officers are sort of in this weird dynamic where they know that their ultimate audience and who's really paying the bill is you, the parent, but they sort of have to go through the student. And they want to see students take initiative anyway, okay? So the answer is, can you appeal financial aid awards? The answer to that is absolutely yes. Because the worst case scenario is they say no, but even if they say no, they cannot take anything away that they've already given you. So even if you drop F-bombs and swear at them up and down, they cannot take away what they've already given you. So there's really no risk. But who should you ask? Oh, by the way, the one thing you do not want to use is the term negotiate. Financial aid officers hate this. Let me reiterate that. Financial aid officers hate this, like hate it with a passion, because they don't want to be seen in the same vein as like used car salesmen, right? They do not negotiate. If you want to get hung up on quickly, use this word. If you want to have a shot, avoid this word like the plague. Oftentimes people think, well, I have to appeal to the financial aid officer, and that's not always true. You can appeal to admissions also for merit aid. okay, for more merit aid or some merit aid if your student didn't get any. And the person you go to is whoever signed the bottom of the letter. That would be your son or daughter's assigned admissions officer. Now, again, just keep in mind that like Ivy League schools don't give out merit aid. So there's no point going down this particular path for an Ivy League school. Near Ivy League schools, so like Georgetown, doesn't give out merit aid. Don't bother. But just because your student didn't get merit aid doesn't mean they don't give them out, right? So for the majority of the schools in this country, they give out merit aid, and public schools also. So your student may not have received any, but you can still ask, but understand the context. So for example, Villanova, right, is not really known for giving out a lot of merit aid. In fact, the percentage that they give out, the percentage of students that they give out merit aid to is single digits, I think last year, under 10%, I believe, right? So what that means is basically 90% of kids didn't get merit aid, right? So you can, of course, ask for merit aid, but the fact that your son or daughter didn't get merit aid from Villanova or a similar school doesn't mean that they're bad students. Just the group that gets it is so small that most kids didn't get it. It doesn't hurt to ask them. You can also appeal financial aid or the need-based aid, and again, you contact the assigned financial aid officer, which is the person basically who signed the bottom of the financial aid letter. Schools always have an assigned admissions officer and assigned financial aid officer for every given student. You just want to find out who those are and just make the contact there. But you also want to be clear in terms of what you're asking for. And so this is a real scenario that happened this year. And I hear this particular thing all the time. Family gets 2 financial aid award letters, school A and school B. School A, as you can see, offered a scholarship of $20,000. School B offered a scholarship of $10,000. And you're okay as parents whether your kid goes to school A or school B. So the question that I get all the time is, hey, should I call school A should I call school B and ask for more money because school A offered twice as much as school B? And the answer to that is no, because it's all relative, okay? Because in this particular case, this is a true case, this is what it actually meant. The cost to attend school A was $48,000. The cost to attend school B is $38,000. You have the scholarships amount there. And so the net cost was exactly the same. And in fact, when we finally got down to it, the net cost difference between school A and school B was $80. Okay, school A ended up being cheaper by school B ended up being cheaper by $80. And so basically it was like, hey, you could have appealed to school B using school A's letter, and school B would have said like, okay, fine, we'll give you $81. You happy now? Like don't waste the time, right? So if you're gonna compare, right, compare on sort of final or out-of-pocket costs, not just on the scholarship amounts, because especially if you're gonna try and play one school off each other, the school is going to ask you for the other school's letter, and the financial aid officer is gonna, in this case, is gonna see both letters and be like, yeah, we're within $80. Why are you calling me, right? So a lot of these times, when people say, oh yeah, it's not worth applying, asking for financial aid, a lot of times it's because of this right here. Okay. Other considerations. So if you have a substantial change in circumstances, so of course this day and age, right, people have lost jobs, hours have gotten cut back or furloughed or whatever, that is a legitimate reason to appeal. So if you or your spouse or whatever the case may be have lost your job and now you're really worried about finances, absolutely contact the school. In fact, schools are basically expecting it. And it's a legitimate reason, right? I mean, absolutely. Okay. But if you're going to play schools off each other, where you and me, we might be okay with our son or daughter going to either school A or school B, and to us, it may not make a difference. But to the schools, they actually do. So you want to be sort of mindful about whether you're comparing sort of brand name school versus store brand. So I like to use the example of sort of macaroni and cheese, right? You can either have Kraft macaroni and cheese name brand or store brand macaroni and cheese. And honestly, for me personally, I don't really care. And honestly, I don't actually really eat macaroni and cheese that much, so I really don't care. But if you're going to play one school off another, this actually matters because it's not who you think is comparable, it's who they think is comparable, right? So as an example, one of my clients' kids got into Georgetown, but that student also got into I think it was like Endicott College, right here in Massachusetts. Okay, and Endicott is a great school in itself, right? But there's just, to the school, there's no way that Endicott is on the same level as Georgetown, right? And this is not to speak ill of Endicott, not in any way. Take any school, but they're just not at Georgetown's level as Georgetown perceives it. Okay, so if you take and you say like, well, this school gave me so much more money, and it's going to be end up way cheaper than for my kid to go to Georgetown, right? You're going to get hung up on. Is the bottom line. Okay. The same thing goes for public versus private. So an example here I'll use is like UMass Dartmouth, which is a great public school in its own right, or Keene State in New Hampshire, or whatever, take your pick, right? And your son or daughters can go to engineering at UMass Dartmouth, but they also got into MIT. So the question becomes, can I use UMass Dartmouth's letter against MIT? You're out of your mind, right? That again, you're gonna get hung up on. That's just not even close. Again, UMass Dartmouth, not to pick on UMass Dartmouth, it's a great school. Keene State's a great school. Every school has its strong points, okay? But just if you're gonna play one school off the other, you gotta think about these things. The exception here, public versus private, is some of these so-called public Ivies, right? So University of Michigan, University of North Carolina, University of Virginia, University of Miami, University of California, Berkeley, right? Those are like elite tier but public universities, right? You want to use one of them against MIT or something? Okay, fine. Yeah, that's a conversation worth having, right? And the term that you don't use, right, that you don't want to use, we said negotiate. You never want to say negotiate. The term to use is reconsider. Would you be willing to reconsider? Or can I ask for a reconsideration, right? That's the magic word. And of course, always use your pleases and thank yous, right? You are asking for more money here, but the term is reconsider. So for those of you on the call, jot that down. For anybody else who registered but wasn't on the call, they lose out. I don't know what to tell you. Okay, but you guys know the term to use and the term not to use. It's reconsider. Now, just keep in mind, when you do appeal, there are no guarantees. And even if they give you more money, you don't really necessarily know why they give you more money, just that they did, right? And they can give it to you in the form of a loan, need-based aid, merit aid, whatever. But it doesn't hurt to ask, ultimately. It just does not hurt to ask. Okay? Now, after all this, you've gone through all this, if you guys are still with me, there's still sort of, when I work with families, there's still a couple of unresolved questions, and it's the three numbers. Well, two, really. The first number is your EFC. This is how much the school thinks that you can afford, and this is the number that they use to calculate the financial aid, right? So this was based on all the things you filled out on the FAFSA, the profile form, whatever. So at this stage of the game, if you're looking at financial aid form, this number is already set. But what you really need to think about is this number. How much can you afford to pay, right? And for every family, it's a little bit different. And it's not just, well, at the end of the month, I have $500 left over per month, so that's how much I can afford to pay. Yeah, that might be true, but think in a broader context. So for example, if you're thinking about retiring early, from your job, but you need to send your kid to college, but right now you have 3 cents in your 401k or your retirement account. But again, you want to retire early, whatever. You probably can't afford to pay that much for college because really, if you want to retire early, you really need to save for retirement, not spend it on college, right? That's just an example. The third number that you really want to think about is how much you're willing to pay, right? And those are different numbers, right? Because families sometimes have multiple children, right? It just depends on who you love more, whatever. And remember, using the plus loan, the amount that you're willing to pay might actually be more than what you can afford to pay. And so I'll give you a perfect example. They're not clients, but I know this family where the parents are both high-powered executives and the parents make just tons of money every year, okay, well into the six figures. So their EFC is really, really high. But they also spend like drunken sailors. So how much, and they have no savings. In fact, they have a fair amount of debt because they spend like drunken sailors. And so how much they can actually afford to pay is actually zero, right? But how much they were willing to pay, their child got into a well-known, very expensive private school in the area for about $75,000. But they were willing to use that plus loan to pay for their kid $75,000 a year to send their kid to that particular school, right? So they made a ton of income, they have no savings, but they're willing to take on that debt. Again, you can do that. Now, whether or not they should have done that is a different story, but you can do that. So part of this challenge now is to figure out sort of what these numbers are for you. And again, they're different for everybody. Okay. So again, I'm going to just quickly pause here for a moment just to see if there's any questions. And I know I go kind of fast. I hope this all makes sense. Okay. All right, so no questions here, so we'll move on. And so be realistic. So one thing that I often get as an answer when I ask these questions of families is this, right? This is one of those, like, if I had a nickel for every time this happened, it'd be a millionaire type of thing. The answer I often get is, how much you willing to pay? Well, it depends. If he or she does well, and, a good major, then, then I'm willing to pay, right? Which quite frankly is just a nothing answer. It's just nothing because it's ill-defined. What do you think is a worthwhile major, right? And also your spouse, what do they think? And what does well mean? Does well mean like makes dean's list at the college or doesn't flunk out, right? Which is it, right? And for how long too, right? So mom and dad, parents might be saying, well, I'm willing to pay for all 4 years. Other parents say, hey, you know what, we can only afford to pay you 2 before we have to borrow, whatever, right? Be realistic about this stuff. So if you want to set limits on your son or daughter, based on a GPA or whatever, fine, but make it specific, make it concrete. I can tell you, most families I deal with, they say this, but in reality, they don't mean this. Like they think like, hey, this sounds really good, I'm going to tell my kid this, right? To sort of motivate him to do well. But at least in my experience, I don't know of any family that'll say like, oh, if you went from a 3.0 down to a 2.9, we're cutting you off. Like that just doesn't. I've just never seen that happen. I suppose somebody out there has done that. I've just never seen that. Also, think about the airplane oxygen mask, right? You got to take yourself later. Yes, as parents, we want to do well for our kids. We want our kids to achieve their hopes and their dreams, and I totally get that. I'm a parent also, but realistically, in calculating how much you can afford, you really got to think about in a broader context, your overall finances, what you can afford, not just, $500 at the end of the month, I can just throw that towards college, right? So, because if you think about that example where the parents borrow that $75,000 a year, after 4 years, that's $300,000, not counting accrued interest, right? Seriously, they could have said, hey, student, instead of sending you to college, how about we just buy you a low-end Ferrari? It's actually cheaper. Or a small house, right? So you gotta be kind of realistic about this. And quite frankly, in that family's case, they really need to save for retirement because they have no savings whatsoever. So you gotta think about it in broader context. So a couple to-dos, right? So if your son or daughter is not on the scholarship search, get them on the scholarship search. It's a great thing to be doing right now because yes, they're doing online schooling, but nobody's going anywhere, so they have the time. But the money is out there to be had. Now, normally I would say before you make that commitment, visits, accepted students day, sit in on classes, right? Stay over in a dorm, whatever, right? All those things to help your son or daughter figure out where they truly want to go, where they can see themselves. Obviously, that can't happen right now with the pandemic, um, but schools are doing online tours, online accepted student days. You can still have your son or daughter reach out to the dean of the department of whatever their intended major is, or reach out to a professor in their major to ask questions, whatever. So there are still some ways around it, and also think about some of those negotiating strategies. What to use, what do you want to ask for? Which school to use against which other school, things like that, right? So think about those things. So when you go ask for more money, I will say when it comes to negotiating strategy, if you have already paid your deposit, negotiations over, unless there's that change in circumstance, like I lost my job, right? So if you sent your deposit into school A, and now you want to go back and say, well, but school B gave me a better offer, that's not going to work, because school A is going to say, you've already committed. We're not playing ball. All right. So this is why I typically tell people to kind of hold off on deposits if you're gonna ask for more money. Okay, but that's up to you guys. Couple of last things. Now you have some information, right? I hope that this was really useful for you. I love the saying because now you can kind of control what's going to happen. You can control whether or not you're going to get more money. Right? Take charge of this. Use this information for good. Okay. Lastly, I will just pause for a moment and just a moment to see if there's questions. But if you do have questions either now or afterwards, there's my contact information, website, email. You can also find my Longhorn Financial page on Facebook. I'm also on LinkedIn, and I also do have a YouTube channel where I post videos on this and other topics. So I put out a lot of information. But if you do have questions, feel free to reach out. And I can at least give some basic guidance. So we are running close to the end of time here, but let me just quickly pause to see what questions you may have. You can either unmute yourself or you can chat in, either way. All right. So again, if you think of something afterwards, again, there's my contact information. Don't hesitate to reach out. But I do hope that you got a lot out of this segment. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me tonight. And I wish you all the best of luck. So thank you so much for joining me, and have a great evening.